defend those lands they took. Okay? Okay, that'll take us back to our next subtopic, which is the war in Europe. We're going to go back to the war in Europe. Because we haven't talked about Europe since we joined in, have we? Nope. So the war in Europe. Now, think about this. You don't really have to write it down. President Roosevelt was thrilled that the Allies were starting to force Japan on the defensive because it would make him easier to pursue his #1 objective of World War II, and that was to defeat Germany in Europe. So he didn't want to really have to worry about being on the defensive in the Pacific because he wanted to be on the offensive in Europe. You see what I'm saying? So that was a big relief when he found out that we had won the Battle of Midway, and Yamamoto now would have to be on the defensive, and the plans in the Pacific would be to go on the offensive, because he didn't want to have to worry about defending that group out there while he was trying to win in Europe. Now, in 1942, the German Nazis had control of most of Europe. Hitler's plan to gain land in Europe was working. And by 1942, Germany had successfully conquered most of Europe under the regime of Hitler's Nazis.
So, did you have to apply to be a Nazi? Soldiers?
You were handpicked, yeah.
Oh.
And we'll get into that a little bit later. And, and Hitler's SS, which was his kind of his secret guard or whatever, and the people that went out and did his bad deeds to be in the SS. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Now, President Roosevelt was a little worried in Europe because he knew that Germany had vast resources in both raw materials and industry. He knew they could produce, war goods at a pretty good rate. He was concerned about that. And he thought that if the Allies gave Germany time to kind of dig in Europe, they would be nearly impossible to defeat. So Roosevelt had some concerns in Europe. He wanted to win there, but he knew that Germany had vast resources in both raw materials and industry, and he also believed that if the Allies waited around very long and gave Germany time to dig in Europe, they would never defeat them. So, how would you keep Germany, Emily, from digging in Europe? How would you solve their advantage to have an industry and raw materials? What would you do? If they have all that in Germany, what would you do? Try to weaken it. You're not going to take it, you're going to destroy it by doing what? Bombing the tarnation out of it. So what Roosevelt did is he ordered around-the-clock bombing of all German cities. Around-the-clock bombing. So B-52 bombers went in there and dropped tonnage of bombs on the country of Germany, specifically large cities where they would have industry. So to keep the Germans from digging in their homeland, President Roosevelt ordered around-the-clock bombing of German cities. Now, not only might it bomb the industry sites and harm them that way, what else might it lower in Germany that might help them?
Population.
Well, population and German morale. So those are both good answers. So President Roosevelt hoped that this continual assault on German cities would not only keep them from turning their raw materials into industry and war supplies, but also would lower morale among the people of Germany. Get bombed for quite a while and have to seek refuge all the time from around-the-clock bombing would get you kind of down the dumps. Now, to be honest with you, it really didn't affect Germany's war effort as far as industry went, but it did hammer away at German morale. It really did hammer away. Now, you've got to listen to statistics. By the end of World War II, 2.7 million tons of bombs were dropped on the country of Germany. 2.7 million tons, not 2.7 million bombs, 2.7 million tons of bombage was dropped on Germany. Yeah.
How did they figure that out?
Just trying to study what they dropped and what they did. Yeah, I don't know.
That's not a lot.
We always say,
Every
but we
bomb
always
they
say
did.
approximately because we don't know for sure. But approximately 2.7 million tons of bombs would be dropped on Germany. Now, where are the Allies? Which front are they really hurting at right now?
East.
East. On the Eastern Front, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was losing thousands of soldiers daily against the Germans. They were having a real tough time prior to the United States getting there. Okay? So, the Russians desperately needed the United States and England to take some pressure off those troops on the Eastern Front. So, on the Eastern Front, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was losing thousands of soldiers daily against the Germans. And the Russians desperately needed the United States and England to come in and take some pressure off his troops on the Eastern Front, because he's fighting there all by himself, right? Against Germany and those other smaller countries we talked about. Well, Prime Minister Winston Churchill of Great Britain and President Roosevelt get together and they decide they better come up with a plan to relieve Russia, take some pressure off them, because if they don't, they're going to lose the Eastern Front and many thousands of Russian soldiers. So as Stalin is desperately asking the United States and Great Britain to take some pressure off them, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt get together and they put together a plan to relieve Russia. Now, if you're going to relieve Russia, where would you attack? Would you attack the coast between Germany and France? Or would that be pretty well fortified? Be very fortified, right? Because the Germans came across the Maginot Line and took control of northern France. So where did Churchill suggest that the Allies attack in Europe to relieve the Eastern Front? What's that? South. Okay? The southern part, and Prime Minister Churchill referred to the area of Europe that they would attack as the soft underbelly of Europe. So as Roosevelt and Churchill are planning strategy on how they're going to relieve the Eastern Front, Churchill felt the best way to relieve the Eastern Front was to attack the southern part of Western Europe, because what would Germany have to do once it was attacked? Would they have to turn some of their attention from the Eastern Front south? They certainly would. Well, in order to even attack, think about it geographically, in order to attack the southern part of Europe, what area would you need to control that was right now in German and Italian control? North Africa. Very good. So, once they made the decision to attack the soft underbelly of Europe, they had to go in and secure North Africa first. And once they secured North Africa, they would then strike at Italy and the soft underbelly of Europe itself. But it doesn't happen without a victory in North Africa, and that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. I'm going to give you the rest of this time, almost 10 minutes, to maybe get your sheets here and get organized on those thank yous, okay? So we'll talk tomorrow about a battle in Europe for North Africa.